The Third Association of African Maritime Administrations Conference, which held in Abuja from the 19th to the 21st of April 2017, was fittingly declared open by the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, on behalf of the President and Commander-in-Chief, President Muhammadu Buhari. The ceremony also witnessed the unveiling of the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, NIMASA's new corporate identity. The opening ceremony formalities came to an end with the exit of the Vice President, whose speech had set a high bar for the quality of discussions expected at the conference. The mood of most Nigerians attending the conference was expectedly optimistic. Mrs. Jean Chiazo Anishere, the first Vice President of the African Women in Maritime, expressed as much.
We are happy that IMO is here because we'll be discussing about the African oceans and the seas with particular reference to piracy. We don't really have the Piracy Act yet. There's been a lot of draft work still with the Nigerian National Assembly that is yet to be considered. We also have issues relating to conventions, international conventions, the regulations and how we, Nigeria can ratify these conventions, and the ones that we have ratified, how we are going to domesticate them for the growth of the industry.
The Secretary General of the Abuja MOU, Mrs. Mfon Ekongwusoro, also put the conference in perspective.
Nigeria is a major player in the region. Nigeria is a contributing financial member to the IMO. And I think it is important, especially as the African continent is concerned, given the number of member states in the IMO, it is very important that the major shipping nations in Africa should be represented in the council. Because I think IMO is also operating that policy of inclusiveness, so that while you have people in the West, or shall I say the Northern Hemisphere, well represented, it's also important that those in the Southern Hemisphere be represented in the Council, which is the decision-making body of the IMO.
Clearly, delegates were keen to get into the meat of the conference as proceedings began proper immediately after the opening ceremonies. 3 very illuminating sessions followed, which were chaired admirably by the refreshingly efficient Managing Director of the Nigerian Ports Authority, Hajia Hadiza Bala Usman.
I would like to start off chairing the session by inviting the presenter for the session.
The first paper of the conference on combating the menace of piracy and maritime crimes in Africa was presented by Rear Admiral Adeni Yoshinowo of the Nigerian Navy.
Piracy and most of the other crimes we're talking about, they start ashore on land and they also end on land because the benefits are enjoyed on land. So how come we're not able to profile these chaps? This is the angle, for instance, the Nigerian Navy is adopting and has adopted and is building on, and this is what we're encouraging other navies to also build on, and other agencies across the region as well as in Nigeria. This should be at zonal, regional, and continental level. And I want to believe for maritime administrations that also manage shipping, they have a responsibility in a confluence to play that confluencing role to manage such in a way that we can pick these guys ashore before they strike. For those who don't have the anti-piracy law in place, for the various MOUs that have not been in operation, please, we need to take a second look at this, ensure and spearhead the domestication effort, as well as the implementation efforts, as well as to promote the capacity building of the various agencies, that is maritime law enforcement agencies, in improving the lot.
Admiral Oshinowo's insightful paper made for robust discussion by the panel of discussants who came from Côte d'Ivoire and Togo. The discussions also elicited considerable interest with participants who animatedly engaged the panel in an inspired question and answer session afterwards.
I'd like to ask that as regards protection of maritime assets in deep offshore, like the oil rigs and oil facilities, whether this is left only to the national navies of the countries in which these assets are located, or whether this is something that, like the Nigerian Navy, could collaborate with the navies of neighboring countries.
As I speak with you, since April last year, we have maintained dedicated patrols around most of the oil and gas infrastructure around the nation, offshore. These are by no means adequate. The private maritime security companies have complemented that in one way or the other. So it's more of a collaborative mechanism.
The role of African maritime administrations in the institutionalization of the Africa Day of the Sea and Oceans formed the title of the next paper, which was competently presented by the Director of African Regional Affairs at the IMO, Mr. William Azu.
You have to include in the maritime calendar for the year, or in fact, in your government, in the Ministry of Transport, or whichever ministry that is responsible for maritime, this has 25th of July has to be prominent in your calendar of activities. It is crucial. Now, celebrate the day with maritime and shipping activities, and then create interactive media platforms. We have the Maritime Ambassadors Program in IMO. I expect each administration to have a focal point for outreach programs, starting from primary schools. If you start from primary school, even kindergarten, what the sea is, what the oceans are, primary school, secondary school, universities, you generate the interest in maritime. How do we replenish the aging fleet? The ratings, our captains are getting old and leaving the field. So what will happen to world trade in 20 years, in 50 years' time? So we have to think out and begin from home.
The final paper of the day was titled Training of Cadets and Building of Human Capacities. This was delivered by the interim chairman of the association, who is also the chief executive officer of the South African Maritime Authority, Mr. Subantu Tilahi.
We've recognized the fact that you still need to get those specialized skills coming in for capacity building. It is just that it has to happen against a program that is to be monitored quite closely. So particularly in the supporting industry, whether it is shipbuilding, ship repair infrastructure, those naval architect skills and all of those, we needed to find a program to bring in those skills, but we needed a program to ensure that those skills get transferred to locals. And we do have a program like that. The continent can't do it alone because we trade over the high seas. We have to find collaborations with international partners. Now, encouraging the continental approach to capacity building is the discussion that I think we're going to put before the maritime administrators and industry that's in the room.
Delegates from Kenya and Senegal formed the panel that discussed the subject to the satisfaction of all the delegates. After an exhilarating first day of deliberations at the conference, delegates retired for the day to prepare for what turned out to be an evening of exquisite entertainment and fine dining. The Congress Hall of the Transcorp Hilton Hotel was quickly transformed to make way for the dinner/cultural night event tagged Colors of Nigeria.
One more time, I want to say you're welcome to the scenic city of Abuja, the capital of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We've had a long day, and so this evening, we're not going to spend time talking. We want to just expose you to the colors of Nigeria. From the north to the south, from the east to the west, Nigeria is home of variety. And so this evening is going to be an evening of allure, an evening of glamour, an evening of style, charm, and indeed of scenic performance, one that you will remember for a very long time to come. This is one event I want to bet, I can bet anything, that long after you've left the shores of Nigeria, you will continue to remember this evening. It's going to be an evening like no other. an evening that you remember that Nigerians are people of style, people of variety, people of charm, people of allure.
Highlights of the evening included colorful and well-choreographed cultural dances. Maumi, the Nigerian musical diva, was another major highlight of the evening as she thrilled the audience with her very energetic performance. The climax of the evening came when the high-life crooner, Flavor, mounted the stage to churn out a succession of his hit tracks that saw guests swooning and dancing. Deliberations continued on the final day of the conference when delegates once again converged at the Congress Hall the next morning. The first presentation of the morning was by a delegate from outside the African continent. Brigitte Gilbers, who is the Director of Maritime Affairs in the Netherlands, gave delegates a talk on the Netherlands' approach to maritime administration.
The Kingdom of the Netherlands is very much willing to cooperate with the countries on the African continent on issues of mutual interest. And we are happy to assist in matters where we have some expertise. Yesterday, I heard very interesting remarks which also link to the maritime strategy of the Netherlands and the way we achieve this. The word cooperation, collaboration was mentioned often, and these words are the fundament on which we work.
On hand to chair proceedings was the Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Shippers Council, Mr. Hassan Adamu.
It is important that the word sustainability is a recurring decimal in our exploitation of what is termed God-given rights, to Africa. This must be hinged on not the availability of these resources, but how far we have been able to exploit it judiciously for the economies of these countries. I'm sure we are going to have very important discussions.
The next paper of the day was titled Countries' Initiative for Effective Implementation of International Maritime Safety Instruments. The presentation was done on behalf of Dr. James Coley, the Commissioner of the Liberian Maritime Authority, by his Deputy Director, Mr. Charles Eboa Jr.
Article 8 of the AU Lomé Charter emphasizes harmonization of national legislation, which requires state parties to commit themselves to harmonize their national laws by adhering to all the relevant international legal instruments, including UNCLOS, SOLAS, and the protocol to the 2005 Convention for the Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against the Safety of Maritime Navigation, as well as to integrate these conventions into their domestic law and treaty. So the judiciary, the Ministry of Justice, all of them, they are encouraged to take part in this particular endeavors. That is why the Lomé Charter called for the harmonization, because when there is a transboundary maritime crime, a crime is committed in Togo, and the perpetrator is arrested in Nigeria, when the laws of those countries are not harmonized, how can you effectively prosecute these people?
The panelists discussing this presentation were drawn from South Africa, Egypt, and Ghana, after which the conference went into a closed business session jointly presided over by the outgoing interim chairman, Mr. Subantu Tilahi of South Africa, and the incoming chairman, Dr. Dakuku Peterside of Nigeria. The main business at hand was the adoption of the association's draft constitution and the resolution of the last conference.
But all of us as Africans must work together to move the maritime sector in Africa to the next level. It is not the work of the chairman, it is not the work of the secretary, it is our collective responsibility. And so we must begin to change our mindset that any one country can change the maritime landscape of Africa, or any one country can fix the maritime problems in Africa. We must work together to fix our challenges as maritime administrators in Africa.
My sense is that the approach of us all as maritime administrations must, as a matter of necessity, link the two imperatives that we have. The first imperative is to ensure that our countries comply with international regulations and law. The second issue on the other side, which balances the need for us to comply, is the need for us to leverage as much benefit for our economies. And this is the point that we always have fell short as administrations. It is my hope, as the interim chair whose term is coming to an end, that AAMA continues to progress the work it has already started.
In concluding the closed business session, Mr. Subantu Tilahi gave a valedictory speech and formally handed over affairs of the association to Dr. Dakuku Peterside.
Both in ensuring that we comply with these regulations, the international instruments, as well as to ensure that we carve out space for our maritime economies and by extension our economies. So thank you very much for such deliberations. We are very much in transition, and as such it is important that as we become in transition, I was saying to IMO and to our chairperson now, that AAMA is not in the business of forming itself. So at some stage you must complete the establishment of AAMA. We need an organization that begins to do the work that this continent requires. I'm very happy specifically to you, sir, for having hosted us and for all the good work that you did running up to the conference. And on behalf of South Africa, I wish to thank all of you for the support that we've had when we were the interim chair, and for the support that we're having as the secretariat. And my specific thanks go to IMO once more. Sir, thank you very much for the work that you did.
The new chairman of the association then performed his first official function of presiding over the adoption of the conference communique.
Decisions and resolutions. At the conclusion of the conference, a number of key decisions were agreed upon. Below are some of the key decisions, recommendations, and resolutions. I hope the interpreters are on. 1. To achieve inclusive participation in global trade, countries must have the political will to facilitate trade through A. Transparency, B. Simplicity of trade documentation and procedures. The African Union Commission has set aside 25th July of every year as Africa's Day of the Seas and Oceans. Maritime administrations are encouraged to institutionalize this day to raise awareness among stakeholders of the strategic importance of maritime governance for sustainable development. Maritime administrations are urged to devote concerted effort and planning to pursue the following: enhancement of wealth creation and regional and international trade performance through maritime-centric capacity and capacity building, minimization of environmental damage and expedited recovery from catastrophic events. AAMA formally approved the Organization of African Maritime Awards starting from Egypt 2018 to recognize and honor outstanding Africans and African firms. 21. NIMASA has been elected chairman. Some people reported interim, not interim. NIMASA has been elected chairman of AAMA with 11 members executive committee comprising of representatives of Central Africa, that's Cameroon and Cape Verde, West Africa, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, East Africa, Tanzania and Comoros, Southern Africa, Mozambique and South Africa, North Africa, Egypt and Sudan, and Uganda representing landlocked countries. Thank you very much. That's the resolution on our committee. May I now invite heads of delegation to please come and append their signature. Starting from Egypt.
The Third Association of African Maritime Administrations Conference thus came to a close, but memories of the event will linger for a long time to come. The high quality of discourse, the friendships forged, as well as the excellent hospitality of Nigeria.